Chapter 114, Fighting Marcus. Antony's POV. No matter how much it hurt to look back on his past, Antony had always taken a certain bleak comfort in knowing that the worst 2 nights of his life were already behind him. As he screamed in Marcus's face and launched himself at him, he realized distantly what a naive miscalculation that had been. "Why?" he shrieked in their own language, but he already knew why. He had angered Marcus when he took Asau from him, and then he had told his lover about his feelings for Hanyu. He had ignored Marcus and let him believe that these men were the reason, and Marcus had been willing to torture and kill innocents just to punish Antony for that. Antony clawed at Marcus's shoulders and slashed at his chest with his fangs. He tasted his lover's blood, but he didn't hesitate. His only advantages would be speed and perpetual movement. Rather than striking back, Marcus took a step backwards. "Annie?" Marcus sounded so confused, and it was unbearable. He really didn't understand what he'd done to cause this reaction. For him, it was no different than if he had mischievously ripped Antony's shirt and his lover had gone for his throat. He doesn't value their lives at all. He doesn't care what he does to them. He'll do it all again the minute my back is turned. I can't trust him. I lost him. I've lost him forever. I have to get him away from Hanyu now." Antony lunged to bite him again. Marcus put up an arm to protect his chest and neck, and the urge to "Stop, don't hurt my lover," warred with the need to get this threat away from Hanyu, and Antony could not let himself hesitate. He bit deep into the arm that had cradled him so many times, tearing fabric and flesh until the earlier taste of blood was replaced with a whole mouthful. "Annie, what the fuck?" Marcus yanked his arm away and took another step back. "They're just humans. I don't want to fight about this." "You were going to kill them," Antony wailed. "Marcus!" An open-handed slap whipped his head back. He glanced frantically over his shoulder and saw Hanyu huddled over Asau, staring blindly into what must, to him, be total darkness. Too close. Marcus is still too close to him. "There!" The bigger man glared down at him, cradling the arm Antony had bitten. "Are you calmer now?" Antony sprang at him, feet leaving the ground as he rammed the top of his head into Marcus's face. He heard the other man's nose give a sickening crunch, and even now his gut twisted miserably at the thought of causing Marcus pain. "All right, that's it!" Marcus swung his arm out, and Antony had to drop into a crouch to avoid it. The bigger man was fighting back now, and Antony knew he wasn't likely to draw any more blood. His focus now was on moving the fight further and farther away from Hanyu, so he ducked, dodged, and fell back easily before Marcus's attacks. It couldn't last. After less than a minute of successful evasions, Marcus feigned towards his head. When Antony dropped into a crouch to avoid the blow, the bigger man's leg swept out and caught him in the throat, sending him crashing onto his back. Before he could get up, Marcus was on top of him, pinning him down. How many times had they tangled together like this under happier circumstances? Marcus's strong arms caging him, his knees pinning Antony's thighs, his face so close that some of his hair tickled Antony's own cheeks. It was all so familiar, and Antony's treacherous fool of a body longed to reach up and kiss him, and his treacherous fool of a heart wanted to hide in his lover's embrace until all the misery and fear and anger faded away. But neither of those things was ever going to happen again, and the thought was so devastating that Antony couldn't keep his composure. He let out a scream so loud and primal, it felt like it was tearing his throat. "How could you do this?" he raged, twisting in Marcus's immovable grip. "We were in love. It was good. Why would you ruin everything like this?" Marcus just held him in place, staring down with a look that was half confusion and half anger. Would you just calm down? What's gotten into you, Annie? How can we talk when you're like this? We're past talking! Anger was good. Anger would keep his heart from breaking. It's over, Marcus! What is? Keep hold of the anger. Don't cry. Us! I can't be with you anymore. I'm done! Marcus froze. His lips quirked up, showing that kissable dimple in his cheek. It made a strange contrast with that blood still dripping from his nose and the sudden hardness replacing the confusion in his eyes. You're done? The bigger man asked pleasantly. You're done? Literal centuries I've put up with your moods, your whining, your weakness and malingering and ingratitude, and you think you get to say when we're done? Over some slaves? Antony opened his mouth, though he wasn't sure what he would say. It didn't matter. Marcus slapped him across the face before he could get out so much as a syllable. Then he did it again, and a third time. The fourth time his hand fell, it was closed into a fist. Pain exploded through Antony's head as his skull bounced back onto the rocks. Marcus was still speaking, but Antony couldn't hear him past the roar in his ears. He turned blindly to spit a mouthful of blood and heard at least one tooth plink against the stones of the beach. The movement must have angered Marcus, because he struck him again. The bigger man was putting too much force into these last few blows to keep a solid grip on Antony's wrists. He tore one free and brought it up into Marcus's already broken nose. It was a clumsy blow, poorly balanced and not as hard as Antony had hoped, but it did what was necessary. Marcus reared back, howling and clutching his nose, and Antony squirmed out from under him. He got shakily to his feet, preparing to keep drawing Marcus further along the beach, but instead the bigger man whirled backwards, facing Hanyu and Asao. This is your fault, Marcus snarled. I'm going to draw you out like the fucking infection you are, you little bitch! Though Hanyu probably couldn't see him or understand his words, he hunkered lower over Asao, staring around with such terror that Antony could no longer keep his heart from breaking. Marcus moved towards the humans, but Antony managed to get in front of him, crouching low and hissing wordlessly up at his lover, his ex-lover, his opponent. It would have felt ridiculous under other circumstances, but he was too desperate for self-consciousness or any other kind of rational thought. When Marcus came at him this time, the bigger man had a rock in his hand. It crashed into Antony's chest with an audible snap that made him feel as though his whole sternum had been crushed into splinters, and he doubled over, groaning. That only gave Marcus a bigger target, and he brought the rock down on Antony's head. Antony found himself suddenly on his knees, dazed and dizzy. It's not your fault, Annie, Marcus soothed, bringing his rockless hand down to stroke Antony's cheek, which was already swelling from the earlier punches. He's jealous of our love, and he's poisoned you against me so he can have you all to himself. He's been controlling you and changing you, darling. You'll see. Once he's gone, it can all go back to the way it was. The way it was. That would mean quiet nights and peaceful days. It would mean having the bed to himself and not fretting about whether he was frightening Asao. It would mean reading what he liked without being pestered by Hanyu's endless questions. It would mean an end to the fear and uncertainty that came with loving mortals who would always, always leave him behind. It would mean a return to Marcus's bed, a place in his arms, and certainty about what each day held. It would be hell. Antony had already lost his home, lost the feel of the sun on his skin, lost the sight of an open blue sky, lost the taste and texture of strawberries and soup and apples and bread and cold, fresh water. Since he had already lost all of that, he could say with authority that losing Hanyu would be so much worse. Never. It can never be that way again. He pushed up on his knees and butted Marcus's groin. The bigger vampire doubled over with a groan, but he also brought the rock down on Antony's head again. I can't stop him. He will kill Hanyu while I lay here helpless, and there is nothing I can do to stop it from happening. Moaning, keening, Antony tried to push himself up to his knees again, but he couldn't. All he could do was fall onto Marcus's feet. "Please," he tried to say, but he discovered with a hazy, distant shock that most of his tongue was gone. He must have bitten through it after one of the punches or blows from the rock. Now, all he could do was babble formless entreaties, desperate tears mixing with the blood bubbling from his mouth. "It will all be over soon," Marcus said comfortingly. He tried to move forward towards the humans. Antony grabbed onto his legs and curled his whole body around his ankles, stopping the movement. "Run, Hanyu! Please, please run! All I can do is slow him down." Marcus sighed gustily. "Annie, you are behaving like a child." He stepped forward again, dragging Antony over the stones as he took each tiny step. Antony could only grip tighter and bite futilely at his calves. When Marcus came to a sudden stop, Antony knew he must have reached Hanyu. "No, no, 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 no!" He flung himself upwards with a desperate wail, clawing at Marcus's legs until a voice from above stopped his movements. "This looks like mutiny." The words were soft, so very soft, but there was a hardness in them Antony had never heard before. "Antony, I would like to renew my offer. Let me serve as your champion for this fight." "Felix!" For the first time, Marcus sounded uncertain. It's not what you think." "I think it is," said Felix slowly. "I was annoyed when Theo pulled me away from our census because she had a bad feeling about sending Antony here alone. I think I owe that woman an apology. Several, in fact. She asked me to kill you, Captain, and I think I was wrong to refuse. It's time to rectify that mistake." A big hand gripped Antony's shoulder and yanked him up, right off his feet. His head spun at the movement, but when it cleared, he found himself pressed against Marcus's body, his back to the bigger man's chest in a sick parody of all that they had once shared. Felix stood in front of them, looking huge and grim. Antony couldn't see Hanyu at all. Maybe that meant he had run for it? "You think you can beat me, farmer boy?" Marcus spat, his jaw working against the side of Antony's face as he spoke. "Go ahead and try." Marcus used Antony as a clumsy shield to absorb the force of Felix's first blow. The strike caught Antony in his gut, and he felt sure that some unnecessary but very painful organs had ruptured under its force. However, Felix didn't even hesitate to land the next blow, or the next. He must have been counting on Marcus's inability to maneuver such an awkward shield indefinitely, and it paid off when Marcus jerked Antony up too slowly to protect his shoulder. The blow Felix landed was shattering enough to make Marcus drop him, and Antony fell to the ground like a sack. He lay there for what felt like a very long time, listening to the fight unfold as best he could. Both warriors were silent, grimly intent on one another, and the only sounds came from repeated, brutal impacts in the shifting stones underfoot. That was why Antony's battered ears were able to hear the soft, terrified sob a few yards away. "Hanyu!" It felt like his whole body would fall apart if he tried to move it, but that didn't matter. What mattered was getting to Hanyu, making sure he was safe. Antony forced himself up to his hands and knees and crawled in the direction of the sound. Felix let out a short, sharp cry behind him. Antony tried to crawl faster, but his head was spinning and it was hard to judge directions. He opened his mouth to call out to Hanyu, but all that emerged was a wet, squawking sound and a hot rush of blood that gushed over his chin. "Antony?" quavered a small, unutterably dear voice, and Antony had his directions once again. He labored over the stones until he was so close he could hear Hanyu's panicked breathing. He bumped the dead torch with his hands and crawled heedlessly on. A few more agonizing movements, and he collapsed at what he hoped were Hanyu's feet. That resulted in a shriek of alarm, but then warm hands were on him. They hurt. It was the best thing Antony had ever felt. "Oh, gods, Antony!" Hanyu wept. "What happened? Oh, gods, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault." "Don't be stupid," Antony tried to say, releasing another rush of blood. Hanyu's wonderful, painful hands lifted him slightly, and then Antony's head was cushioned in his lap. I could die right now, he thought hazily. This is better than I deserve. He tumbled into blessed blackness just as Marcus screamed out in the unfathomable distance, I yield! I yield!